How would it feel to go to work each day because you wanted to, not because you had to? We are joined by Art of Work author Jeff Goins, who is here to tell us how you can do that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So you know from personal experience, when you were 30 years old, you quit your job so that you could pursue what you really wanted to do.
That's right. Yeah, it was kind of a crazy experience. I mean, I didn't anticipate ever being able to call myself a professional writer. I didn't think that was a real job title. But after doing the work for a few years, it kind of all came together. But, I mentioned this in the book, and I tell this to friends when they ask, it's not so much what happened in those 2 or 3 years of making it happen as everything that happened leading up to that point, the decade of experience that prepared me for that moment.
Wow. Well, you talk a lot in your book about this idea of calling, this word you keep using over and over again. What does calling mean? What is that?
Well, I think it means something different to everyone, or there's a lot of different definitions. And, as a Christian, I believe that you're called by God to something. But I think a lot of times we sort of stop short there, and we think that a calling is this one thing that happens and God has to audibly speak to me like he did to Moses. Otherwise, I'm not chosen for some special purpose. And I read a lot of books and did a lot of research as I was writing this one. And I kept running into this sort of dichotomy between either you have a special calling or you're just like the rest of us. And I think calling is something that everybody has, and it's quite simply the reason that you were born.
Well, how do we follow this calling? You say you have to listen to your life. How do you do that?
I love the Parker Palmer quote. He says, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I need to listen to my life telling me who I am. I think a lot of people think calling is like a job or a task. I think it's an identity. And I interviewed hundreds of people who are living their life's work out right now, people from 18 years old to 80. And I kept running into the same themes over and over, and those resonated with me. And when I was writing the book, I was hoping that they'd resonate with other people. But one of those themes was that your calling wasn't just a certain job at a certain point in your life or even a task that you were called to do. It was really your whole life. And if that's the case, it's more important to think about not what should I do with my life, but who am I? And I think that activity follows identity, that before you can go do something, you have to become someone. And one of the best things for us to do, the first step in finding our calling, is to ask ourselves, who am I really? Who has God made me to be? And then that'll tell you what the next step is in becoming that person more.
Well, personally from, quitting your job and going to another job that there's a lot of fear involved in that. And I feel like a lot of people are afraid to kind of follow this calling in their life. How do you encourage those people?
So my encouragement, and again, this goes back to seeing hundreds of people and reading hundreds of biographies and seeing stories from Walt Disney and Mother Teresa and all of these people who have clearly left a legacy in the world. What do they all have in common? And one of the things they had in common is they all did brave things, but they didn't feel particularly courageous when they were doing it.
Yeah.
And so I think that we think fear disqualifies us from action, that we have to wait to feel unafraid before we're willing to act. And I don't think that's true, and that's certainly not true for the people that I mentioned. It wasn't true for me. I think that you have to do it afraid. And I think the most important lesson that I learned was there's good fear and there's bad fear. And one of my friends who is in the book, Jody Noland, she tells a story about at 58 years old, she found her calling. And it wasn't that she wasn't afraid. She was really afraid to do it. It was scary for her. But what made her act was the fear of not acting. She said, I was no longer afraid of failing at this, because I still could fail. Rather, she was afraid of not trying. And I think that's the greater fear. The good fear should push out the bad fear, the fear of not trying.
Wow. Well, I feel like so many people are just kind of living day to day, and they're like, let me just check this off my list. I went to the grocery store, went to my job, blah, blah, blah. And it just, every day you wake up and you follow the same path. And I mean, you say that when our interests connect with the needs of the world, we begin to live for a larger purpose. What is that larger purpose?
I love how Frederick Buechner talks about this in his classic book. He wrote a great book about vocation called Now and Then. And in that book, he talks about this quote that we've heard again and again, I think, about calling and vocation. He says that your calling, your vocation, is the place where the world's deep need meets your deepest joy. And I think that most of us live in one of those two areas. I think when we're younger, we're going, what am I excited about? What am I passionate about? And when I was in my 20s and I had all these different passions and all these different dreams, most people were saying, okay, that's great that you have those dreams now. Go do that now, because when you get older, you're going to have all these obligations. You're going to have all these needs. And I've felt that as I've gotten older, as I've become a husband, a dad, an employee, you do go through this day-to-day feeling like you're fulfilling other people's needs and obligations and not meeting your own. And I think the challenge and its attention is to find that intersection. I think purpose is the intersection between here's what makes me come alive and here's what the world needs. For me, it's simply using what hopefully is a gift of communication through words, speaking, through writing on my website, and connecting that with the needs of other people. And I can go to bed feeling pretty good about my day if I know that I have made an impact on somebody in some way that's made their life better. And I think it can be as simple as that.
In the book, you talk about this idea of apprenticeship and how it's a key part in finding your purpose. And I know that apprenticeship is kind of this old-fashioned word. Explain what that means, what you mean by that.
So when I graduated college, I had a double major in Spanish and religion, very practical, degree, and I left college to travel with a band for a year. Again, kind of, building this very practical career, not really knowing what I was going to do or even what I wanted to do, just kind of going from one thing to the next to the next. And I kept waiting for an experience, something. I mean, there was graduation, I traveled for a while, I got my first job, all these things that I was doing to feel like, okay, now I'm an adult. And I never felt that feeling. There was no formal process of initiating me into adulthood. It was just one experience drifting into the next. Back in the day, back in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, apprenticeship was that process. You went under the tutelage of a master, of a teacher who taught you the way of your craft. So when I got to my late 20s and was trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do with my life? I can speak Spanish, I've traveled the world, I can play music, and now I'm a marketing director at a nonprofit. What does all this mean? It felt really chaotic. Apprenticeship is the process of finding your way by undergoing somebody else's training. It's a lot like discipleship in that respect. And I think that what's different about apprenticeship now than how it was years ago is that you have to be intentional about seeking those people out, and it's not some formal teacher usually. It's all the people around you that can help you find your way. It's your next door neighbor and your friend and sometimes even your spouse or family member who can teach you something if you're willing to learn from them.
And you say that society's 10,000 hour rule says that if you do something for 10,000 hours, then you're going to master it. But you kind of say that this is not true.
Well, it's true in the sense that you can do something for 10,000 hours and get pretty good at it usually. The question, though, when I think about what should I do with my life, what am I meant to do, is it possible to get good at the wrong thing? And I think it is. I think it is possible. I think we see all around us in our culture, we see people who are doing good work that they hate. Or they're stuck with the golden handcuffs at the corporate job and they just don't want to be there. I mean, I have friends who work in corporate America and they love it. But then I have other friends who have fallen into an opportunity that they feel like they can't get out of it. It's like quicksand. It's sucking them in because they've succeeded at the wrong thing. And so it's not just enough to practice. You have to practice the right thing.
And that's so discouraging because I'm a young working professional and I'm thankful that I found something that I love. But so many people, when they graduate, they get stuck in this wrong thing because that's just the avenue that kind of opened up first for them.
Right.
That's discouraging. How would you encourage those people?
Well, going back to the theme of apprenticeship, there's this concept in the book called accidental apprenticeship, and it's this idea that all of your life is conspiring to get you to a certain point. And really, I think, God is sort of laying that path for you. He is putting things in your path that look like accidents at the time, but end up being an intentional part of the process that get you to where you want to go. The trick is to recognize those things as they're happening and to realize, man, maybe working that job for 7 years that I thought was kind of a dead end or it was the wrong thing was actually really great practice for something else. Now, the trick is you can't stay stuck in that position. I mean, I think there really bad jobs can prepare you for really good jobs if you're intentional, if you see that as preparation for the next thing to come. And I would say never overlook the opportunity to pivot.
It's never too late.
Yeah, it's never too late. As my friend Jody Nolan, at 58 years old, found her calling, would say that everything is practice, that nothing is wasted, that God is preparing you, using all of your experiences that you have right now for the thing to come.
So how do we live? You say that so many people, it's really sad actually, you say that so many people get to the end of their life and they look back and realize that what they spent their whole life doing did not satisfy them. That's so sad to me.
Yeah.
How do you even live with satisfaction knowing that that's a possibility?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm 32 years old, so obviously I don't know this from experience, but through all of these interviews and doing all of this research, it seemed to me that there are two groups of people, and that's probably an oversimplification, but just, bear with me on that. There are people who go through their lives, responding to other people's agendas, responding to the obligations of society, whatever, doing what is expected of them while suppressing their deeper desires, their passion, the thing that they feel called to do. And then there are those people who don't do that, who find their way. And sadly, that's rare. I mean, I read this study that said 87% of the world's workers are disengaged with their work. They're dissatisfied. They're checked out.
Just going through the motions.
Yeah, they're punching a clock if people still do that. And so I think the difference between that is, looking at the work of a guy named Viktor Frankl, who wrote a great book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about what it takes to live a satisfying life. He says the difference is really three things between an unsatisfying life and a satisfying, fulfilling, purpose-filled life, where you can end your life knowing that you lived it well. The first thing is you have to have somebody else to live for. If you're running a marathon, if you're racing towards success, you have to have somebody to share that success with. A spouse, a friend, a dog, a church community, somebody to share it with. Second, you have to have a project to work on. This is why quitting your job and making a bunch of money, winning the lottery, and moving to the beach isn't that satisfying. People eventually get bored.
Yeah.
And then the third thing, the most important thing, I think, and this is a theme throughout all of The Art of Work and all the stories that I tell in there, is you have to have a redemptive view of suffering. There has to be a purpose to your pain. In the case of my friend Jody, whom I keep mentioning, her husband died of cancer. And while he was on his deathbed, before his death, she was begging him to write a letter to their daughters saying how much he loved them, because she had seen a friend of hers do the same thing, die of cancer, lying on his deathbed, writes a letter to all of his daughters, and it changed their lives. Well, Jody's husband didn't do that, and he died, and one of the daughters came to her after the funeral and said, "Did he write a letter for me?" She said no, and it broke her heart. But this pain drove her to start an organization called Leave Nothing Unsaid, helping other people avoid that pain of leaving, loved ones, leaving something unsaid between loved ones.
Wow.
And that helped her find her calling because she didn't wallow in the pain of regret. It was painful, it was hard, but she found a redemptive purpose to her suffering, and I think that's essential.
Wow. Well, Jeff, I really appreciate you coming and speaking with us today. The Art of Work. Make sure you get your copy and just realize that it is never too late for you to follow your true calling in life. Thank you, Jeff, so much for joining us.